Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you guys are tuning in from. I see we got a lot of people from all over the place in the chat. We got Germany, Poland, UK, Detroit, Mexico. We got Wyoming. We got people from all over the place. So hello, good morning, and welcome. If you are just tuning in for the first time, my name is Garrett. Litepanels has been kind enough to ask me to host this series. We are in our third series with them together, talking about cinematic storytelling. And today I am excited about what we are talking about, as it is the most requested lighting tutorial that you all have asked for. Today we are talking about Euphoria through the lens of the holiday. So however it is that you celebrate the holiday, I hope that this end of year is festive for you all. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into today. We are going to be giving away a 1x1 Gemini Soft with a DLP Choice Snap Bag. It creates a whole little package of lighting. So make sure you stay tuned to the end, because the winner will be announced live, and the winner will be somebody participating live in this. So if you are interested in winning that, please, of course, feel free to stay tuned for that announcement. Along the way, as we get into this stuff, as always, I encourage people to ask questions. So if you have questions, if things come up through this, two ways to do that. Number one, we have a Q&A module directly within Zoom. I have that pulled up over here off screen. So if you do have questions, that's the easiest way for me to see your questions. You can also use the chat, but I may not be able to see that or get to that in time. Make sure that you are following Litepanels on both Instagram and YouTube. As though this is the last of this series, we are going to keep these live streams going in 2024. Format and shape might change, but we are going to continue to do these, do more giveaways, more tutorials, more lighting stuff to, again, kind of build this network of filmmakers that we have been building. So make sure that you follow them on Instagram and on YouTube, and you can find me in the same, which is just my name on Instagram and my name on YouTube as well. Now that we've got all the housekeeping out of the way, we can dive into today. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is the single most requested lighting tutorial that we have been asked by you to do, which is why we are doing that. And that is, of course, the aesthetic look and style of the show, Euphoria. Subject matter aside, Euphoria, it has some of the most compelling cinematography and lighting in current television, and so I completely understand why people want to look at and emulate that look. So as we get in through today, use that Q&A module if you have questions as we go through this. I'm going to try my best to be as thorough as possible in the time that we have together. If I don't get to your questions, feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram. That is where I'm most active online, and I will do my best to answer your questions there if we don't get those to those today. Okay? So, Euphoria. We picked 3 distinct looks that the show utilizes and wrote a very loose script that ties those scenes in together, kind of. But we have 3 distinct looks that we're going to be tackling today. We're going to be talking about how we set them up, how we shot them, and then why we chose to do what we did. So before we can get into how we lit this and how we shot this, we first should look at these 3 scenes that we've kind of smashed together. So with that, let's watch this first, and then we will get into how we pulled it off.
It looks like Christmas threw up in here, but I kind of love it. It's like stepping into a snow globe. Unreal and kind of magical.
Everyone's so jolly. I swear seeing people so happy at school.
It's the holiday spirit. Makes you forget about the real world for a minute, you know? Rue, are you okay?
Do you think things will ever be simple? Like, happiness without all the chaos?
In a world like ours, simplicity seems like a distant wish. But tonight, it feels possible.
Maybe that's our holiday miracle then. A peaceful night in our crazy lives.
Okay, 3 short scenes there that kind of tie in these 3 distinct looks. Real quick, Devin asks, does Euphoria use light panels during their show production? Devin, I'm unsure of the exact lighting that they used on the show. I know that season 2 was shot on film, season 1 was shot on digital, both on kind of RE setups. But I do know that the lighting tools that they used shifted dramatically between seasons 1 and 2, simply because of the nature of shooting analog versus shooting digital. I do know that they use, especially in season 1, which is a lot of what we're kind of emulating here, panel lights, which are the 2x1, 1x1s, which is exactly right in line with what we're talking about today. So yes, the fixture style I know is the same for season 1. Season 2, I know that they did some other things because they needed more of kind of like broad spectrum, kind of super high intensity lighting for the film stocks that they were shooting on. But yes, panel lighting is both for Euphoria and kind of across the spectrum in high broadcast and movies. LED panel lights are pretty much one of the industry standard go-tos for most lighting setups. So yes and no. I'm unsure of the brand, but yes, panel lights for sure. Okay, so we have 3 distinct setups that we're looking at, right? So we have the inside of the school, we have kind of the daydream that Rue's got going on, and then we have the outside of the school. Some of what makes Euphoria the iconic look and feel that it has is that they do a lot of what we would call kind of emotional lighting, or lighting for the tone or the feeling of the characters that are being portrayed. And they do a ton of mixed lighting, right? So there's a ton of pinks, purples, and blues. There's a ton of the orange and blue contrasts. They're playing a lot with their color wheel and using complementary and contrasting colors in the way that they go through and light their scenes. So that is what we emulated today in these scenes. So we're going to break these down scene by scene, and we're going to talk about how we set them up, how we lit them, and kind of then go through what we did to get our look as close as we could to the show. Starting with our first scene is inside this school cafeteria here. So for this, it starts with the art direction. So we had a lot of glass walls that we had to deal with. So we lined things with tinsel. We used garlands, and we used Christmas lights, like strand lights, to add depth and dimension. We wrapped a C-stand. That C-stand had to be in the shot, so I wrapped it in a garland so that way it looked like it belonged there. And then we added haze. This is one of the things that you have to use if you're going to be emulating Euphoria. It gives a nice sense of depth. It hides a lot of background. It creates separation. Our key light, 1x1 Gemini Soft with a snap bag and egg crate. This is the same kit that we're giving away for free later today. That gave us a very direct soft source that we were using that globe on the table as a motivator for. And then we used a series of 1x1s and 2x1s scattered throughout to give us the rest of our fill and to give us the rest of that background. Now, Euphoria also loves to do a lot of long takes. They do a lot of oneers, and they do a lot of dynamic camera movement. So this is why we used a doorway dolly, had a tripod strapped on that, and then did a combination of a physical push in conjunction with some panning, and then had our first pull focus for us, which is what gives us this final look that allows our foreground to be distinct from the background, but all look like it belongs together. Now, it would not be a live stream with me if we didn't have terrible artwork. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the lighting plot. I'm going to draw out the lighting plot for you. So you can kind of see exactly where and what we had set up in order to get this look. We did pull reference images from the show Euphoria. We had those with us on set, and then that's what we used as kind of the guide to make sure that we were achieving as close to the look as we possibly could throughout. Something that I highly, highly recommend if you are going to be prevising or you're going to be recreating an aesthetic or a look, make sure you bring those to set. So I bring my iPad, I have everything loaded up, I have production with them on the phones, and we're sitting there and we're going back and forth and we're looking at what we're trying to achieve against the monitor to see how close we can get that. Can you delve into the specific color temperature choices in Euphoria and discuss how they were used in key moments to evoke certain emotions or enhance the storytelling? Yeah, absolutely. Sam does an incredible job in that show of using lighting as an emotional tool. He's far less concerned with the reality of the way a space should be lit and much more concerned with how the lighting represents how characters feel. He uses a lot of neons, right? So like in this scene here is the purples, the pinks, and the blues. But he'll do things like even do like flashlight spotlights on certain characters at certain moments, or do practical set light changes where, you know, things will be lit one way, go to dark, and then come up into another lighting scenario. Again, one of the amazing ways that show takes somebody's mental state and kind of puts it forefront on the screen, right? Because subject matter of the show, people are in altered states, and we use lighting as a tool to kind of create that. We'll get specific into the color temperatures here now that we're talking about the lighting plots. So real quick here, by the way, you're welcome for how terrible all of my artwork is. Glenn, great question. Glenn asks if that's fog or haze. We used haze. Haze sits differently than fog. Haze hangs in the air. Fog kind of sits a little bit lower and thicker kind of throughout. Haze is also a water-based solution. Fog is an oil-based solution. Generally speaking, for the type of work that we're doing in cinematography, we don't really want a whole bunch of oil kind of hanging out in the air, getting into the optics and the cameras and all of that. So haze is absolutely what you want to use. Admittedly, our haze machine was small for the arena that we were kind of filming in, but haze nonetheless. Okay, so let's get into this here. So right here in this room, we had kind of our table and we had our four characters kind of seated here. Again, you're welcome for my artwork. The dolly, we did a push and then we had it kind of kick over to the side like this. And then in that move, the DP kind of moved across as our characters were speaking. And then the first AC pulled focus against that. On the table, we had that small little globe light. Again, that is the globe light that was used in the show. So that was the practical that we were using. Again, when we talk about lighting and how we break down lighting, we need to make sure that we're lighting with intention, we're lighting with purpose, and that our lighting makes sense to the audience, that the audience doesn't sit there and go, well, why does it look like that, right? So to get that nice warm glow on our talent and to separate them from the blues and pinks and purples that we had in the background, that's why you would use a practical on the table like that to then reinforce the idea of this motivated light that we're pulling in from. So in order to then motivate this light over the top is where we flew that 1x1 Gemini Soft on a booming combo stand. So it came up and over the top of them. That had the snap bag on it with the egg crate, which allowed us to get that really soft light, but it still kept everything directional, right? If we didn't have the egg crate on it and we just had the soft box, the snap bag on it, that light would still spread much further into the space. And we didn't really want that because we wanted it to be a very concentrated area of light, the way that that little globe would be for that table. And it wouldn't then cascade into the rest of the space, which is why we want to make sure that we have that control, okay? So this is our key. We had that set to 2700 Kelvin. So it was emitting a very, very warm light, which is the same type of warmth that was coming off of that globe. The camera was tuned to 3200 Kelvin because we wanted to skew this light warmer than just being neutral. Then on either side, kind of here and here, on either side of our talent, we had a 1x1 Gemini Soft. These we were using HSI color on to tune to get the bluish purple that we had for these, and these are acting as our fill lights across to our talent. So this light is being the fill for these two, and this light is being the fill for those two. Set to the exact same parameters, the exact same dimensions, and like you saw in that preview, this light we had up above so it was out of the shot, but the stand was in the shot. And so one of the things that we did in the way that we were setting up the art direction is I just grabbed a garland made of tinsel and I wrapped it around that black stand, so then that way it felt like it fit into the rest of the scene without drawing attention to itself that we had a stand in the shot. Getting creative with that is really important because, of course, as we've talked in this series before, when we light spaces and not faces, when we back the lights up and light an entire space, it gives us the flexibility and freedom to do these complex moves without the need to break and reset every time we do. So these two are HSI 1x1 softs. So these three are all 1x1 Gemini softs. Okay, so then the room kind of worked like this here, like so. Okay, and then we had scattered tables kind of throughout. So this corner in particular got really, really dark on camera, and it had this kind of divider that kind of came out and around like this. And so what we did is we covered that divider with tinsel wrap, and over the top of that, we flew a 1x1 Gemini hard. And this hard is what acted as our hair light for our talent, right? So again, something that we talked about before, we are not always using 3-point lighting. 3-point lighting is good for docu, corporate, interview style stuff, but we use the principles of that, of separating our foreground from our background, making sure we don't have unattractive shadows, and making sure that we have a primary source of light in the way that we set this up. So this light was all the way across the room, but because the 1x1 hard is as bright as it is, it acted as a really nice fill or a hair light for behind our talent here. So now that we had our talent lit the way that we needed to, or we wanted to, we then needed to make sure that we filled the rest of the room with enough light and enough color that we're then able to see and understand what it is that we're looking for. So in this corner over here, we flew a 2x1 Gemini soft really high and kind of down and across to fill kind of this whole section of the room back here. And then there was these two double doors here that were quite dark. And so what we did is we took another round table and we put a 2x1 Gemini low mounted on the floor here, pointed at these doors with that same pinky purple color. So this light pushed against this way and then kicked back into the room, and this light directly pointed into the room, filling this background space, while our key light, our two multicolored fills, and then our 1x1 hard backlight illuminated our foreground there. So while these three lights were all using the color mode HSI, these two lights we were using the RGBW color mode. The difference between those is just in the way that we tune the lights, which is kind of one of the things that we had a question about earlier. With the RGBW color modes, you can tune the color specific to the Kelvin of the camera that you're filming with. So we had our white balance set at 3200. We were skewing our key warm, but then we could tune these RGBWs so that way the pink channel or the pink color wasn't going to blow out either of our red or blue channel because we had it tuned to the color value of the camera that we were filming with. Do you remember the color intensities of the light or ballpark? Yeah, so our backgrounds, these 2x1 Geminis were both at 100 because we wanted to illuminate as much of the interior as we could. We didn't need a 100% on the 1x1 hard. Again, the purpose of a backlight or a hair light is you want it to be bright enough that it is effective at separating your foreground from your background, but not so bright that it's drawing attention to itself. Okay, so this was probably somewhere in the ballpark of 60 to 70% on those. These, because we were going with more of kind of a blue than a purple, we turned those down to probably to about 75% on those two. And then the overhead we did have at 100%. Something we've talked about before, but something to keep in mind in case this is the first time you're tuning in. When you are filming people of various complexions, different melanin levels within their skin, it is important to know how different colors of light reflect and refract off of their skin. The deeper somebody's skin tone is, the warmer you want to light, because the more appealing it pulls from their skin. The fairer somebody's skin is, you can drift more into the daylight color temperatures, because lighter skin has a tendency to be able to reflect and refract much more of the color spectrum. So when you are filming people of various complexions, which, and we're going to go and look at this, all four of the talent that we had at the front table here, all were different complexions. You want to make sure that your light works for everybody in that scene. If you don't take somebody's complexion into account in the way that you're lighting somebody's features, some people are going to end up looking correct, some people are going to look incorrect, some people are going to fall off, some people are not. So you need to be mindful of the subject that you're filming and how that's going to translate. What were the lighting ratios? Great question. So what we did is, because we had our backlights tuned to the RGBW, these were the ones that we played with the most in terms of figuring out how to complement the rest of the lighting. We went more blue with these here because these were going to be directly contrasting the warmth coming off of the overhead. We went much more pink back here in terms of the lighting there, because that's the direct contrast to these. And then these, we split the difference between the pink and the blue, living into that kind of purple. All of that was done by eye and by feel. And that's one of the nice things with the Gemini lights, is that you can kind of tune those as specifically as you want. So I went through with a couple of set hands and we pre-lit this, and then when the DP and the first AC showed up, we then went through and revisited the lights and changed all of the color values of all of the lights to get it as close to that Euphoria scene that we were trying to emulate as possible. But all of that is very, very easy to tune directly within that. Okay, we had a lot more questions here, and we are rapidly moving through this here. So I'm going to move through these as quickly as possible. Did you have to dial back the saturation of the lights so it didn't get weird on camera? Yes, Miles. Blue is going to be the first channel on your sensor that's going to blow. That's true of all cameras. That's true, or digital anyway, of all sensors. Okay, just the way that a Bayer array is set up, your blue channel will blow first, followed by red and then green. So yes, in the way that we're tuning the lights, we can also tune the saturation to give us enough blue that it translates on camera, but not so much so that it's blowing out a color channel and we're losing that in our skin tones. How close is the footage to what we saw in the room? Were the colors all created by the lights, and how much of the colors were punched in by grading? Devin, great question. The only grade that was done on that footage that you saw was a Rec 709. So that's just taking it from its color space that we filmed it in RAW to Rec 709. I did no further color grading to that footage. That is straight out of camera. So all of the color that you are seeing directly as shot from those Gemini lights. I am in no way, shape, or form a colorist. I am not qualified to do that kind of work. So I try to get as close as I can in production, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to do it. Okay, after setup, ratio is everything. Where did you start? Which light, what contrast ratio did the camera allow? So yeah, your camera is going to be specific in terms of how much dynamic range your sensor has. Filming on a red, shooting in RAW gives us a lot more latitude in post. In some of the previous episodes, and you should go back and watch some of those previous episodes, one of them we talked about confidently underexposing and how we meter light. And we use EL zone in small HD monitors to get a really accurate read in terms of where our latitude is. I confidently have about 6 stops that I can play with in terms of my contrast ratio if I still want to maintain complete clarity in that. So we start with the key, and then we go to the fill, and then we go to the hair, and then we go to background. And we use that kind of order in which we kind of create those looks. But if you're shooting for your exposure. Make sure that you get your key light set first and then light around that. How do you determine white balance in cameras when you have such wild colors in the scenes? I'm new to lighting and trying to catch up. Paul, great question. So again, going back to the melanin and the contrast in people's skin, right? Depending on the complexion of somebody's face, for me at least, determines a lot of the light that I'm using and what I'm tuning my light to. Because we had people from very deep complexions to very fair complexions in the same shot, I made the choice to trend warm to make sure everybody felt normal and natural and was well lit. So 3200, which is your standard tungsten, is going to be where I was living. And then I wanted it to feel warm, even though we were already tungsten native on camera, which is why the key then was actually set warmer than that at 2700. When you're working with multicolored lights, you definitely still want to make sure that you have some sort of lighting anchor, right? Which is going to be what your normal natural white is. That can be China ball lighting, where it's just a walk and talk, small light. You can do things like this, where you have a very distinct and set up neutral light, but you want that neutral to play against that multicolor, unless you're filming some sort of, club scene or things, because you still want people to look like people. Okay, nice explanation for lighting in particular. I do mostly weddings, but I also do some corporate work, and it's good to know how to properly light a big conference room. Yeah, again, go back and watch some of the other videos, because one of the concepts that we continue to talk about, because it's something for narrative work, but especially if you're doing, live event work, you don't want to set your lights so close to your talent that you're unable to move around a scene. Backing those lights up and lighting the entire space to give you that fluidity to move around is absolutely key here. For people with different complexions in the same scene, how do you go about exposing them properly using false color? Fantastic question. Again, Small HD has a new form of false color called EL zone. And if you have the ability to use that, it is hands down the best monitor false color option that you have, because instead of it just being the camera image coming through and then giving you IRE readouts, it's actually you tune it to the sensor of the particular camera that you're using, and it's using that data line, and then it's actually giving you exposure from 18% gray to half stop, one stop, two stops over and under. So you can actually visually see very quickly exactly where everybody is. If you're using standard false color, fair skin complexion is going to come in around 60, 65 IRE. Deeper complexion is going to come around at 40, 45 IRE. If you're using EL zone, they actually have metrics that will tell you fair and deep complexion. Generally, it's about half to one over and then half to one under to kind of play that way. It also depends on the camera, right? So reds, it's a lot easier to bring highlights down than it is to bring shadows up. So if I'm going to be trying to find where I want my exposure to be for a scene with multiple complexions, I'm going to trend to bring my deeper complexions into an acceptable exposure, knowing that the fairer complexions can kind of be brought down in post. Some cameras are better at bringing up shadows, some are better at bringing down highlights. That's knowing your own system here. What was the biggest struggle you noticed in recreating this scene? Not having the same location, right? So this location, this entire back wall here was just made of cascading glass doors, which glass and mirrors are a nightmare, right? So we lined this whole thing with tinsel lighting here. Over here and here, we had two big banks of cube glass windows that were introducing kind of a greenish blue into our scene. Had no control over that. I had lighting control inside this room, but not in the adjoining room where all of this light was coming from. So kind of getting creative with the art direction within a space, getting creative with the lighting and positioning within a space. Those are the things that you've got to figure out on the day or in pre-lighting. But yeah, those were the ones that were interesting. Okay, we got a ton more questions. Let's pause real quick. We're going to move to the next scenes. I'm going to come back to all of these, I promise, but I do want to make sure that we talk about all three setups while we're on this live stream. I am so stoked that you guys have all these questions, and I promise we're going to get back to those. Okay, we're just going to pause, and we're going to move over here real quick. This is our outdoor setup here. Not all lighting setups have to be as complicated as what we were talking about here. Again, finding motivated light, like that street light that we had naturally there, and tuning our lights to them go a long way. For this setup, we only used 2 lights, a 1x1 soft and a 1x1 hard. The 1x1 hard there, you can see we pushed through a 6-foot magic cloth to give us a really soft diffused blue light, and we used a 1x1 Gemini soft up there in the corner to reinforce the lighting coming from that street light. Now, we were in this scene filming the fairest complexion and deepest complexion talent we had on set, and we put them in the same scene. As you might imagine, there are interesting lighting challenges that come from that, namely how you want the light to be bouncing and reflecting in their faces. So the way that we achieved that final look was on this talent's face here, we Hollywood in some fill, and on our fairer complexion talent, we then Hollywooded in some negative. So one of the things when it comes to lighting is it's not always about adding more light. Sometimes it's about eliminating or removing light, or just redirecting existing light that's there. For this, we only had 2 lights, right? So 2 1x1s. We kept it really, really simple. So if we look at this here, we have kind of the stairs that are kind of here, right? Like this, we had the railing kind of going down the middle, and we had our 2 talents sitting side by side here. Okay, so on this side, on this side here was a street lamp that was already there. This would be the practical that we're playing with. We then took that 1x1 Gemini soft, sent it up about 10 feet, pointed it down in the same direction as our natural light was. Now, the 1x1 softs are plenty bright lights. The light that was coming off of that street light was not a warm light. It didn't go orange the way that we wanted the light to go. But the 1x1 is such a powerful light in and of its own that I could tune that light to be warmer, and it would overpower the street light that was there. The street light that was there was coming in at about 4,500 Kelvin. We then had that light coming in closer to 2,700 Kelvin. On the flip side of that, over here, we had a 6-foot frame that we had a one-stop magic cloth to diffuse, and we took a 1x1 hard on this side and pushed it through this to our talent on this side. This gave us, and this was very, very blue. Again, pulling that saturation down so we weren't blowing any channels, but we had this blue light coming from this side and we had this orange light coming from this side. This light was behaving as a very hard directional light, and so we wanted this to be a very soft fill that didn't seem directional at all. And then depending on whose solo shot we were filming at the time, we would then have somebody come in and Hollywood a negative duvetine, or flip it around and have a bounce to, again, either pull light away from a very fair complexion, or to take this light and bring it back to somebody with a much deeper complexion. Okay, so really simple. 2 lights. Knowing where to position and how you contrast those lights are important. Always find the practicals and sources, and always motivate or reinforce existing things. So when your audience is watching something, they're not questioning the lighting. The lighting just kind of washes over them and they just take it at face value. Okay. Yes. So the term Hollywood, Ben is asking about what that means. That is a very fun phrase that gets used because people think that working in Hollywood is so glamorous. What Hollywooding actually is somebody just physically having to hold a thing, basically acting as a C-stand or a stand of some kind. So if somebody asks to Hollywood something, can you Hollywood that over here? It just means you have to be the person who does the holding. It's the least glamorous thing that you can do, and it's a great way to work out your arms and your shoulders just by having to hold things. So when you hear that term, that's what they're referring to here. How did you go about working with the lights when in the air? Great question here. So all of the Gemini lights, soft, hard, 1x1, 2x1, are all fully battery powered, so we don't have to run them off mains, which makes them really, really easy. 2 ways that you can control those lights. One, there are dongles that you can get for the lights, which allow you to then be able to remotely control those lights, either via wireless DMX or with Bluetooth with an app on the phone. Or the easiest thing to do is just to bring the light down, tune, make your adjustment, and send the light up. The reason why that works so effectively is because if your lights are positioned in the place that they're supposed to be, you don't have to worry about behavior or intensity. You're just talking about direction, right? So I can sit here and I can tune the light. I can make the light where I want. I know the placement that it's in, and I just then can just change the direction relationship between the light and the subject. Are there differences in power outputs between the soft and the hard at max power? Yes, there are. The hard 1x1 Gemini is about 5 times brighter than the 1x1 soft Gemini. And that does not mean that the 1x1 soft is not a bright light. It is an incredibly bright light. The 1x1 hard just happens to be an insanely bright light. So yes, there is that. And then as the name implies, the behavior of the light is a little different. The 1x1 soft produces, as one would imagine, a slightly softer light than the 1x1 hard. Same goes, by the way, for the 2x1s. There's a 2x1 soft and a 2x1 hard. Behavior and intensity, but all of the lights are incredibly, incredibly bright. What was the ISO on the camera? To not crush the blacks into nothingness or to make it grainy. I love how you're talking about lighting outside. Darren, I'm glad you like it. We do have more episodes also about filming outside if you want to kind of go back and watch some of those ones that we talk about. When it comes to camera settings, you want to keep all of your camera settings as neutral as possible, which means that your camera should be at native ISO. Native ISO on the red Komodo is 800, right? So I rarely, if ever, deviate from that because I want to get the most dynamic range possible. I want the most pleasing roll off possible, and I want the least amount of noise possible. Your shutter speed, if you're rocking a camera with shutter speed, should be double your frame rate, unless there's a narrative reason to play with that. If you're going with shutter angle, that's 180 degrees. Your frame rate for American cinema is 23,976, commonly referred to as 24. For some other systems, it would be 25, like I know in the UK. So you wouldn't deviate from that unless there was a reason that you wanted to kind of like play with your slow motion or, either under cranking or over cranking. But yeah, I try to keep all of my camera settings as neutral as possible. And if I am underexposed, I bring in more light, right? Or if I'm overexposed, I reduce the amount of light or I use ND. The 1x1 lights that we had in that scene were so bright that at my camera's neutral settings, which was, I think we were at 2.8 aperture, and then all of the native camera settings, we still needed ND even though we were shooting at night. The Gemini lights are incredibly powerful lights. Instead of Hollywooding, the gaffer I work with just asks for, there's a whole bunch of fun terminology that we can use in the filmmaking world. Some of it is better than others. What was the blue that was used? What number gel was the blue in? Great question. That blue that we dialed in, we just did with HSI, which is hue, saturation, and intensity, because it's really easy to customize. Generally, if I'm going for a much more neutral, less stylized night look, I will use Silver Moonlight, which is a gel that is baked into the gel libraries of those lights. I don't remember what the Lee filter number it is, but if you look up Silver Moonlight or Midnight Silver, those two would be those. And I've used those before in these lights. They're great, but we wanted a little bit more intensity in our saturation than those allowed. Shutter angle of 172.8 versus 180. The only reason you would use 172.8 is if you are going to be distributing your film into multiple markets that are NTSC and PAL. So if they're going to be doing kind of cross conversion of your frame rates, you would have 172.8 because that's then going to make it a little easier to conform to multiple frame rates. If you're just going to be shooting in 23,976 or 25, 180 degrees is perfect. If you're going for web distribution, which is just going to be like YouTube, Vimeo, that kind of thing, 180 degrees is just fine. Are the lights water resistant? No, the lights are not water resistant on their own, but they do have light jackets or like rain jackets in the same way that cameras do. You can buy an accessory, which is a rain jacket. I have rain jackets for both my 2x1s and my 1x1s. The nice thing, because they're LED, they don't get all that hot. So rain jackets work just fine for those where they wouldn't for something like a tungsten or an HMI. Are all these live streams available on Light Panels YouTube channel to rewatch later? Glenn, yes, I'm so glad you asked. They are. There's 3 years worth of them on Light Panels YouTube channel, so you should go subscribe because they also post other cool stuff other than just my stuff there. When do you determine it's okay to let ambient or practical light in the scene and when it's okay to mix with your lights? Yours were very different color temps. Great question. All of those decisions are going to be based on the narrative of the story that you're telling. So sometimes you will use a practical as a practical and then just enhance that existing light if you're okay with the behavior of that light. Oftentimes what we'll see is a practical that is going to be dimmed down to such a degree that it looks like it's on and we can see that there is a source for light there. But then we will be bringing in our own lights because we can control the behavior of that light, both in terms of the shape of that light, the intensity of that light, the roll off of that light, so on and so forth. A lot better than we can with a practical. So for what we did, we had practicals solely to be used as an excuse for our lighting. So we could come in and motivate that light in a way that make it feel and work the way that we wanted to. How does magic cloth compare to frost grids or other silks? Never seen magic cloth before. It really depends on the gaffer. It depends on what type of light that you want. I like magic cloth because it refracts so much light that it is a great source of mass diffusion, right? So if I want a light that has no particular direction or source to it, that's what a magic cloth is good for, in my opinion. You can use, other things like, bleached muslin. You can use ultra bounce. You can use scrims. You can use, half stop, quarter stop. You can do any number of things. They all just slightly change the behavior of how that light is kind of cascaded or refracted, reflected, and diffused. Okay, let's talk one more lighting setup, and then we're going to get back into these questions. I love how many questions y'all have, but I do want to make sure that we talk about this last one because this last one was one of my favorite ones because it was just so weird. One of the things that makes Euphoria such a great show is their use of emblematic shots, or shots that aren't based in reality. They are shots that are solely to give you the excuse of the experience, right? So one of the things that Euphoria does a lot is that they will mimic high art, right? They will mimic existing works, or they will go with something that is, again, just to make you feel something about a particular thing that is in no way attached to reality. And this scene starts with this projector. I bought this projector at auction. It's just a big event projector. And I put it behind our subject and we blasted haze through it because I wanted that light to be giving a haloing effect to our talent, where it kind of wraps them in these beams of light like you can kind of see here. I then took two 2x1 Geminis there, one illuminating the background to get that tinsel to shine, and one is our key light. I then took a 1x1 Gemini soft, again through that same snap bag to act as our fill and to fill in the wreath. We then used a diopter to give us those cool little light reflections and refractions that you see, right? That's just a split glass diopter that we're using in front of the lens. So you can practically get those kind of shimmery effects through that, because again, that little sequence is happening exclusively in Rue's mind and is in no way attached to the reality of the two locations that we have her and her friends in. We then did a little film emulation over that to add some film grain. We did a bleach high pass filter over the footage to again give it that little washed out look without losing the exposure on the skin tones. And then you kind of combine all of that together to get that kind of final weird look where we're shooting through a Christmas wreath. We've got the tinsel in the background. We're reinforcing that tinsel with the projection light beams from behind the subject, and then using a traditional key and fill to kind of give them a general sense of placement. Okay? Just wanted to touch on that real quick here. We got a ton of questions that we're going to get into. Again, if you have more questions, throw them in here. We're going to spend the rest of the time getting into these questions and then announcing the winner of that 1x1 Gemini Soft package. It hands down, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here with light panels. It's hands down my absolute favorite go-to light is the Gemini 1x1 Soft with the snap bag and egg crate. You can do so much with that fixture. So one lucky person is going to be great here. Okay. Maxwell says, emblematic is a great term that I've never heard. Had to jot that one down. I love emblematic shots, man. They're so fun. So fun. Can multiple lights be linked to create lighting changes live on set? Devin, yes. All of the Gemini lights support DMX, both wired and wireless, as well as Bluetooth with the Director Studio app on the phone. The wireless DMX and wireless Bluetooth require additional hardware to then run those, but yes, you can run all of those on set. And if you're running DMX, especially off of a board, you can do all sorts of cool pre-programmed lighting effects on them. They rule. Could you give a small synopsis of what a diopter does? Yes, Miles. Basically, if you think about this in terms of like a magnifying glass, and you cut that magnifying glass in half, and you put a handle on that half of a magnifying glass, what that does is it's going to change the focal length, the focus, and the way that light refracts as it hits the edges of that glass element. And you can handhold that and kind of place it and move it in front of the lens, and it's going to give you that scattered light effect that you see in those shots. So yeah, it's a really easy thing to have on hand. It's something that you would use very sparingly. Like I would use it in music videos, cologne and perfume commercials, and then like emblematic style shots. I'd very rarely use that in just general narrative or commercial work, just because it draws a lot of attention to itself. Okay, is the wireless DMX module using the CRMX Lumen radio protocol? Johannes, great question. I'm gonna let somebody from the light panels team answer that because they're much more technical than I am, and I don't want to give you bad information. How accessible are the Gemini lights about loading and intensity? They are some of the easiest lights that I have used in terms of what they're capable of doing and how easy they are to adjust. You can adjust everything from saturation, intensity, hue, to the 0.1%. So you have unbelievable control directly within it. The menu structures are really simple to understand. And then when you get into kind of the sub menus and the more specifics, they have instructions directly on screen to walk you through how to tune all of those. Very, very easy, very, very accessible. You have effects, you've got colors, you've got bicolor, you have hue, shift, and offset. You've got tons of control within those fixtures. With so many sources, how do you manage directing each and every light? Yeah, so again, when it comes to how you approach, especially with like scene one, right, which we have a ton of different lights, you start with what's most important and you work to what's least important. There are no small roles. Everything's important. But you would start with the key light. What is our main illumination? Let's nail that, and then we'll work out. So then now that we have our key illumination set, now let's talk about how do we fill that in to get that to look the way that we want. Okay, so now that we have our key and our fill, there are no unattractive shadows. Everybody looks the way that we want them to. How do we separate our foreground from our background? Okay, there's the hair light. We now separate our foreground from our background. Our foreground now looks exactly how we want to. How do we then illuminate the background to give us that final look that we want, right? So it's a hierarchy, and you do it one at a time, and you get them to behave the way that you want to before you then move on to the next one, okay? Let's see here. In what camera filters were used for achieving all of that? Yes. Great question. So one of the things that makes Euphoria is the camera work itself. The three biggest things, if you want your look to be as close to that, separate from the lighting, is going to be you want to have a very, very shallow depth of field. Most of this was shot on a 50 mil, which is on a crop sensor, which is like a 77, because that's kind of the style, these kind of close-up, kind of intimate shots that Euphoria has. And that 50 mil that we were using was an f2.0. which is like a T18, give or take. But yeah, so that very, very shallow depth of field. Make sure that you have a good first who's going to pull focus for you on that. We then had a quarter stop of black pro mist in terms of the filtering that we were used. And that's what gives it kind of that blooming, that kind of soft highlight roll off. That's all going to be coming from that pro mist filter. I'll show you here. So like here. All right, so if you look at this, see how this globe kind of has that glow to it? That glow is coming from that Pro Mist filter here. And if you zoom in, you can even see that we have glow kind of around the outside of our talent on both sides. That glow that you're seeing is all done practically in camera using that Pro Mist filter. And you can see it even when we kind of get into the close-ups here of this shot. That glow is still present kind of throughout. Don't rely on post-production. Post-production is not going to give you the same reliability that you have. All diffusion filters, Black Pro Mist included, comes in 1/8, quarter, half, and full stops. And it's nice to have a full set of them because you can then determine how much of that blooming and diffusion that you want. So all of this stuff was shot on a quarter stop of Black Pro Mist. Because we were using vintage lenses, the lenses themselves brought some character to the image. So between the vintage Leica lenses and the quarter stop of Pro Mist, that gave us that really soft kind of smeary look that you get a lot in Euphoria. So shallow depth of field, diffusion, which is going to be a big one. And then the other kind of piece to this is the way that they play with focus. You'll see a little bit of focus hunting in that show, which is where things kind of fall in and out as they kind of find their focal marks. That is one of those cool things that is like technically an incorrect thing to do, but when used stylistically enhances the look or feel of something. And they do such a good job of that in Euphoria. So you kind of play with those three things, and that kind of is what gives you that look that we're talking about here. Could you dive more into the internal color temperature or white balance settings? Yeah, great. So we were filming in RAW. So when you're filming in RAW, you get a lot of latitude in post, which means that you can change the ISO natively after the fact. You can change the color temperature natively after the fact. You're able to do some things with RAW footage that you can't do with a compressed footage or a pre-baked footage. That said, I knew the complexion of the talent that we were working with, and I knew that I wanted it to be warm. And so I knew going into it that by having our camera tuned to 3200 Kelvin, in terms of our white balance, was going to give me the best skin color renditions on people's faces. And then I shaped the rest of the light based around that. With the Gemini lights, with the RGBW lighting color setting, you can then tune colors to the white balance that you're on. Blue is not always just blue, red is not always red, pink is not always pink. It is how the camera interprets color. So within the light, if I can say, I have this camera interpreting color at 3200 Kelvin. That's what neutral white is. And now I want pink. It's going to tune that color to the white balance that I'm choosing to shoot at. So I know that as I dial things in, it's going to be giving me the look that I have in my head, as opposed to having to look at the light and then look at the monitor and then look at the light and look at the monitor, and then what looks good here doesn't look good here, and vice versa. So you have a lot of that control that you can play with within the Gemini lights. But I knew the color temperature I was going to be filming in ahead of time, and I make those decisions based on how I want the audience to feel about what I'm looking at, and then of course on the complexion of the talent that we have here. Okay, we are rapidly approaching the end here. Okay, we did that. How long did it take to set up once you were on location? Talking mainly about the lighting plots. Great question. So we filmed all 3 scenes in 3 hours. Talent arrived at 5, and then principal was from 6 to 9. We tried to kind of have 1 hour per setup. Obviously the outside scene was a little shorter. The inside purple pink scene took a little longer. And then we ended with the projector sequence there. We started pre-light at about 1. So from 1 to 6, we were playing with light, and we really only pre-lit the first scene, the purple and pink scene, because that was the most aggressive of the lighting setups that we were doing. We knew how we wanted scenes 2 and 3 to be lit. going into it, but we didn't pre-light those in the same way because they were much more simple setups. So it took us about 4.5 hours to pre-light that scene, and then we spent 1 hour in each of those scenes when we actually filmed the thing. Let's see here. I know this question's not related, but how is the stream setup lit? Oh, yeah. Juan, great question here. So over here, I have a quasar tube, which is what's giving me this kind of side piece here. And then here is the 1x1 Gemini with that snap grid here, giving me this kind of soft main. And it's just those two lights there. With a diverse cast, different skin tones, how do you expose for different faces? We talked about that. I hope that I answered that question a little earlier. Any tips for setting your camera ISO in these fairly dark scenes? Michael, something that we've talked about before in past episodes, and you all should go watch those. Lighting bright and grading dark is going to be much easier than trying to shoot in the dark. Cameras, especially if you're keeping your cameras at their native settings, aren't going to be able to produce the way that you want to. So by keeping everything at a really nice exposure, kind of at that 18% gray, that neutral 50, that is going to ensure that then you can sit there and you can play with the values in a way that maintains people's skin tone. So light, bright, gray, dark. 2 episodes ago, we talked about confidently underexposing and how to do that. So I would check that one out. All right, boy, there's still 50 questions in here. So I'm not going to be able to get all of these questions. So please DM me on Instagram. Go follow me. It's just Garrett Salmons. Follow me on Instagram. Send me these questions. I will absolutely do my best to respond to each and every one of you over on Instagram. So go there. This is so much fun. So now, without further ado, let me announce the winner of the lighting kit today. So Light Panels has selected Ben Silver as the winner of the prize. So Ben, congratulations. Wherever you are in the world, you are the winner of that. Light Panels will be getting in touch with you. You should also get in touch with Light Panels. Go DM them on Instagram. They will set that up for you there. So congratulations. Big W's to Ben in chat. Good work. There will be more of these, right? I don't know exactly what they're going to look like, but please follow me on Instagram. Please go follow Light Panels. Follow them on YouTube. Follow me on YouTube. All of these live streams will be up over there, and I go into even further detail on my YouTube as well. Guys, what an incredible year. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. Thanks to Light Panels for hosting this wonderful thing, and I look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll chat soon. Goodbye.
It looks like Christmas threw up in here, but I kind of love it. It's like stepping into a snow globe. Unreal and kind of magical.
Everyone's so jolly. I swear St. People's so happy at school.
It's the holiday spirit. It makes you forget about the real world for a minute, you know?
Rue, are you okay?
Do you think things will ever be simple? Like happiness without all the chaos?
In a world like ours, simplicity seems like a distant wish. But tonight, it feels possible.
Maybe that's our holiday miracle then. A peaceful night in our crazy lives.